everybody. My name's Kim, and in this stream, we're going to be looking at bitmap painting in Harmony. I'm specifically using Harmony Premium for this with the node view. The node view is quite handy for what I'm doing, but it can be done in Advanced and Essentials as well. If you want me to do a stream where I do something like this in Advanced and Essentials, then just let us know, and I can maybe set that up for you guys. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a character that I painted in a bitmap program like Photoshop. And I brought that into Harmony, and then I replicated it in Harmony. And you can see how close the two are. There's some small differences just because creatively painting the same thing twice is kind of boring. So I probably changed up some stuff here and there. But they are actually very similar in their technique. And this character was designed by a coworker of mine, Z-Bird Brain. That is her username, and you can find her on YouTube and Instagram if you like the character design. So yeah, let's get started. So how did I actually go about starting this painting? I decided to use a mixture of vector and bitmap layers. Just because bitmap is heavier than vector. And so obviously you want to try and be as economical as possible. And so I decided to do all of my base layers in vector and then do all of my shading layers with bitmap. As you guys might know, you have the option of bitmap layers and vector layers. And you also have art layers, which can be defined as bitmap and vector, and my graphics driver crashed again. Okay, great. Right, so as I was saying, we're trying to be economical with my layers. So you can put multiple base layers on one layer. It's actually really a good idea to do that. As long as they aren't touching, you're not going to have a problem when you paint because it's probably not going to get anywhere near each other. So this is just a habit that I get into of trying to keep some stuff together on layers just to keep the layer count down. And then what I do is I make some bitmap layers, and those bitmap layers are the layers that I use to paint the character. So I have one bitmap layer for each vector layer. And of course, this is pretty easy to do. When you create a layer or a new drawing layer, you just make sure that all of your art layers are bitmap instead of vector. And what I did here is just using the cutter that is sort of built into each layer, I cut these layers into each of the vector layers. So this is great because it means that you don't make a mess when you're painting with your bitmap. You don't make a mess outside of your layers. You don't have to worry about bleeding over the edges and having to go and erase all of the bleeding that is happening over the edge of your layer. So that's why I like to cut stuff in to the layers just to keep it nice. It's kind of like a clipping mask. If you were to use something like Photoshop, it would be a clipping mask or clipping mask. So I created these bitmap layers and I used the inbuilt cutters to cut something in. You have to make sure that you select the layer that you want to cut into, drag a new separate connection out of that into the end of the drawing layer you want to be cut. And this little mask comes up here, and you want it to be an inverted mask. So you want it to be this black with the white mask in the center and not the opposite. So you can see if you look at my color over here, if I invert that, it pops to the outside, and we don't want it like that. We want it to stay on the inside of the shape. So that is how I cut that in. You can use cutters as well if you want to, but I find not really necessary. This is only if you really want to cut multiple things into one shape and stuff like that. But I find that this works fine for what we're doing. And then I just grab my brush tool, and the brush tool does take some engineering to get it to the texture that you want. So I'm going to show you that now. But I grab my brush tool and I just go step by step, painting in each of my layers, each one cut into each section. And down here, I have a little bit of ambient light that I cut into the whole shape of the character. So that is why all of these are connected to a composite, and that composite is cut, has the ambient cut into it. So the ambient light being this little edging that I have here. So I was able to just do this on the entire shape without worrying about being cut into a section and having to give like a new layer or having to do it on the same bitmap layers that I have here. So I just gave that its own separate layer, cut it into the entirety of the shape. And then I had my lines separate from that composite so that my ambient lighting did not overlap the lines. So you can see there's no overlapping. Over here I have some overlapping, but that is by design. And I did that on the bitmap layer for the line art because the line art also has some painting on it, as you can see. If I actually disable this, you can kind of see what happens to, doesn't really show up much. It's like over here where you can see the color is changing on the eyes and stuff like that. So I didn't want the lines to have the ambient light cut into them so that I could control exactly where I wanted the colors to change on the line art. And I wouldn't have to worry about the ambient light interrupting that. And I think that is basically all I did. I don't know if you guys have any questions about this so far. Like if there's anything here that confuses you and you want to ask a question about it, let me know, because I am going to demonstrate now just with like a I'm going to demonstrate now just with like a ball shape how I went through it step by step. But if you guys are happy with this, then I'll carry on to that demonstration. If anyone has any questions, ask now or forever hold your peace. Another way you can do this, and this just depends on the type of artist you are. Some people, sometimes I do this when I'm feeling bold. When I'm in a bitmap program, I will paint everything on one layer. It's closer to like a traditional feeling where you build up the paint like you would if you were doing like oils or acrylics or anything like that. You kind of build up over on one layer. And when you make a mistake, there's no erasing. You just paint it back the way you want it. That is definitely something you can do here. It's a little bit more economical because you can have just one vector layer with the entire shape of the character. And then you just go for it on a bitmap layer that's cut in. Of course, you have a little bit more, room for error, because you can't just work on a separate layer and not have to worry about the rest of your painting. Like your paint will affect the rest of the painting. But that might be a style that you're interested in. You might be coming from a very traditional painting background, and that's something that appeals to you. Then all you would need is one vector layer with the shape of the character, outline, fill it in, cut your bitmap layer, and then just go for it and just like paint on one layer. I have not tried that yet in Harmony. I have tried it in bitmap painting, but I haven't tried it yet in Harmony. If you are feeling brave, then go for it. Okay, so I'm going to carry on. I am just going to do a demonstration of how I did this. Let me actually hide my drawing so that it's not too hectic. And I'm going to just, I am going to just change the color card to white so that it's not so dark. Okay. I'm just going to do this with a simple shape. Don't want to get too technical. So I have created my vector layer, just a normal vector layer. Nothing fancy about it. I'm working on the line art layer. You could work on any layer you like here. Obviously, though, try and keep it organized. Like you want to remember what is where. So I'm just going to work on the line art as a default, and I'm just going to do a bowl. Let's pick a color. Maybe blue. Okay, so this is how I start. Let's turn my snapping off. There we go. I start with a pencil tool or a shape tool. The reason why I try to use the pencil line tools is because they're just easier to control. If you prefer to use brush tool to draw your shapes, that's also fine. I mean, it's art, man. Just do what you like. But I always like the pencil tool just because I feel like it's very controlled. So it's easy to just sort of grab those shapes and grab your contour editor and change the shapes. And if I was tracing a character like this, I would use my pencil tool, draw straight lines, and use my contour editor to create the shape of the character. And the reason why I do it like this is because, again, it keeps it very clean. You can see there's only 2 points on the line here, as opposed to me drawing with like a freehand pencil line and ending up with 3 points. Oh, that's a whole extra point. In this case, it just ended up very clean, which is kind of nice. But yeah, it's just a habit. Like I know that my lines are going to be really clean if I do it that way. So I like to use the pencil tool for that. But if you want to freehand it or whatever, I delete the lines afterwards anyway. So either way, the lines aren't going to mean much. And then I fill it in, and then I delete the line art. Okay, the reason why I delete the line art is because if you're drawing with a pencil tool and you're going to fill it in, the fill actually fills to the end of, there we go. The fill of the pencil line will fill to the center of the line itself, instead of to the edge of the line like it would with a brush line, which means that if you're going to cut into this and you're going to paint with Bitmap, you're going to have this little edge sticking out that won't have any paint in it. So you actually, excuse me. So I actually want to delete the line. A nice sort of easier way of doing this, if it's the same color and it's confusing and you're struggling to grab the line to delete it and you're deleting the fill instead by accident, is you can actually draw the line on the line art and press this button up here, create color art from line art. And on the color art layer, you will get a stroke. Let me go to my drawing line here. You will get a stroke that you can fill. A stroke is an invisible line, so it means that there's no line art involved here. It's actually invisible, which means that we can easily go back to the line art layer and then just delete that line. And now you're stuck with just the color fill. So that is one way to do it if you feel like you're struggling to delete just the line art of that. But then, of course, you have something on the color art and not the line art. If that confuses you, you can always cut that color art and stick it on the line art layer. But yeah, it's just a little workaround if you're struggling to grab the lines and delete them. I personally don't really have a problem selecting the lines, but just thought I'd show you in case. Okay, so there we go. We've got our flat base layer. And I want to paint on this layer now. So we're going to add a bitmap layer, which is going to act as the layer that is cut into the base layer. So Control R, I think it would be Command R on Mac, is the shortcut to add a new drawing layer. And we want this to be bitmap. Now you can just have one layer assigned to bitmap if you want. I'm just going to make all of them bitmap. But if you know that you're only going to use the one layer, you can just make the one layer bitmap instead of all of them. Okay, so here's our bitmap layer. We need to connect it to the composite, and you need to make sure it's connected above the layer it's getting cut into, because obviously if it's below it, you're going to be painting on it and it's not going to show up above the vector layer. So make sure that when you connect it to the composite in the node view, that it is above the layer that you are going to cut it into. If you don't know this, in the node view, your composite, everything on the right-hand side is below and everything on the left-hand side is above. So if you were to flip this composite onto its side, this would make sense. If all of these nodes were coming out of the right-hand side of your composite, this would be the one at the top and this would be the one at the bottom. So that's how I like to think about it. So everything on the left is at the top, everything on the right is at the bottom. So make sure it's connected to the left of the base vector layer. And then we're going to cut it into that layer. So pull a little connection out of your vector layer, slot it into that cutter that pops up, and it should be the white mask inside the black square that you end up getting. And that should mean that when you paint on this layer, it cuts into this one. So let us just test that quickly. Let's pick some random color. Yeah, there you go. Cuts into that vector layer. So that's exactly what we wanted. So we're going to work on this layer now with the bitmap painting. So this is where you're going to have to really figure out your painting style and how you want to work. This is obviously the way that I work, but you guys might want to try something completely different. I work with really simple brushes, and that's just because I kind of like the idea of working closer to a traditional paintbrush, which is just a solid color that you build up depending on your flow and your opacity. Some people like to work with more texture, like they're using a sponge or some sort of textured brush or like a dry brush. That's something you can do depending on the brush you choose. I'm not going to go too far into the brushes. If you would like me to do a separate video where we really go into the brushes, then we can do that. Let me know. So I literally just work with a circle, like a hard circle brush. You can change how hard you want this to be. I like to work hard. I like to work hard and I like to blend the edges with opacity and flow rather than using a soft brush to blend, because the problem with using a soft brush in digital art is it makes things look blurry, especially if you're using it on everything. Because naturally, shadows are hard and soft. There's a mixture. So I like to use a hard brush, leave it hard where there are hard shadows, and soften it with opacity where there are soft shadows. And you get a kind of textured, painted look by doing that way. Again, this is just how I do it. You guys might want to play around and find your own style. So yeah, I'm gonna work with a hard brush. Wait, let me just go here and see what we have. Don't want to work with a soft lid. Let's move this over. These are, of course, are preset brushes, so you can always come here and see if there's something that you can use immediately. Like this is actually kind of cool. The shortcuts I'm using to make my brush bigger and smaller is I'm holding O down on the keyboard and then sliding my my mouse to make it bigger or smaller, if you're wondering. But what's nice is sometimes coming here, picking a preset and then working off that preset. Okay, I'm going to stay with the soft lid. Let's go back to customizing from there. So I'm just adjusting my maximum and minimum size, minimum obviously being the thinnest that it can be. Like I said, I'm not going to go too much into these. These are something you can play around with. We can always do another video. Hardness, I want this to be solid. Spacing, random size, random angle, pen tilt sensitivity. If you have a tablet or a Cintiq that supports pen tilts and pen rotations, that's something that you can turn on here. Mine does, but I'm not going to do it for this video, for this stream. Roundness and angle, that's cool. This is a rotation, but that's only if you're using an angle, and I'm not using an angle. Okay, transparency. So this is kind of cool because you can actually control how hard or how transparent the brush is depending on how hard you press. So this is like really nice for customizing for painting, I think. Oh, that was flow I was playing with. Sorry, this over here is transparency. So say 100% transparency when I'm pressing the hardest, and you could even go 0% when you're pressing your lightest. I don't know if I want it that light, and I don't know if I want it that hard. Remember that when you paint over it again, it will build up. So it's okay if you work with a low transparency. If you want something darker, you just keep building over it. We don't want random flow, random opacity. Yeah, I don't know. It's fun to experiment with this stuff, especially when you're painting, because painting is really an experimental process. Dual tip, I'm not going to touch this now. If we do another video on this, we can totally go into it. And I'm not going to worry about paper texture now either. I actually want a very solid brush. Okay, and over here, I can actually just make a new brush out of this by pressing that little plus button, and you can name it, and you'll have like a preset that has all of those options. So that's pretty great. So let's look at what this looks like. I'm just going to use the pink again. Okay. Okay, so that's cool. I might play with the opacity a little bit more, like bring down the transparency, maybe to like 52. The idea is that you want to be able to build up. So you can see I'm getting a nice build up there and then blend in. And the way that I blend is actually to use the eye picker, the eyedropper. It doesn't pick eyes, it picks drops. It drops eyes. It's a color eyedropper. And the shortcut for this is Alt and D. So it's, there we go. And I use this to pick in between colors. So where I've built up the paint, you see that there's like an in-between overlapping color here. And then I go back to my brush and I use that to work in my blending. So I'm gonna do it properly now on this one. I'm gonna delete this and like actually use a darker color. So I could pick this color from this shape over here and create a new swatch from it. This bitmap color palette over here is different from the vector color palette. It works much closer to bitmap programs where you can kind of just make a bunch of swatches, color pick colors, just using the eyedropper. So it's a little bit more chill. There's no sort of color IDs like you have with Harmony vectors, where if you change the color ID, it changes all the colors in your image. It doesn't work like that. It's just single color pots. If you change one of these colors, it's not going to change the colors that you've put into your image. It's just a normal bitmap color picker thing. What do you call it? You know what I mean. So I color picked that, made a new swatch of it. If I double click this swatch, I mean, you can do your adjustments here, but I like the multi-wheel color because there's a lot of, you know, I can play around with a lot of like saturations and how much red and stuff you want in that color. So I like to use the multi-wheel. But it's really up to you, whatever you're more comfortable with. It also depends on what programs you're coming from and whether you have done traditional art or not. You know, there's a lot of different ways that the people experience these things. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. I can actually pull my opacity down over here. So I'm going to do that. I went to low opacity. This will change as you paint. It just depends on the colors you're working with. So you can see I'm getting a nice like build up happening as I work around the edge of my shape here. And then you'll see like it's a little bit, what can I say? There's like some color banding in between, and that's where you'll use the color picker to pick your colors in between and then go back to the brush tool, which is Alt B. So Alt B and Alt D are actually pretty close to each other on the keyboard. Why did you change the brush? Did you eat my brush? Am I on the wrong layer? I am. I'm on the vector layer. Why did you do that? Okay, lock. Let's go back here. Okay, so I am picking this color, going back to my brush tool, and then using that to blend over the color banding that is happening here. So it's just, you know, blending it in like you would if you were digitally painting in any other program or even traditionally painting. It's the same idea. So you're just blending in your colors by picking the in-between colors and then blending over that with your brush tool. And that's how you end up with that sort of textured blended bitmap tool. And obviously I add some lighting, and as I showed you with the character, I added a rim light as well. And then that's it. That's what I do. That's bitmap painting in Harmony. I don't know if you guys have any questions or if you want me to expand on this in any other streams, or if you want me to go more into brushes and how to create your own brushes. Let me know. Okay, guys, so I don't know if there's any other questions from you guys. We don't have any. I think this is the first time we've shown sort of like a bitmap painting technique in Harmony. So like I said, if you want us to go further into this, let us know. Otherwise, you can find a whole bunch of stuff to learn for free on our Learn portal, which is learn.toonboom.com. And yeah, that's all I have to show you today. I'm gonna go now, and thank you so much for watching my stream.